Well, good morning, everybody. Friday, the 24th of April. Hopefully, all still doing really, really well this morning. And so we're coming we're getting very close to the 1st of May. A time where I think many of us are going to have some mixed emotions going forward. A time where we actually still maybe a little bit of uncertainty exactly what it looks like for us as a country going forward. And what most of all we need is wisdom in this time that we're going into. And that's exactly where we find ourselves in James chapter 3 this morning as we continue our story, or continue our journey, sorry, should I say, through the book of James. So I want to read it for this morning quickly, James chapter 3, verse 13, and a couple of verses, and just pick up a thought or two from there. If you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with humility that comes from wisdom. But if you are bitterly jealous and there is selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It is also peace loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. And so I found that absolutely amazing. And here we come to a point in James where James is almost giving us sort of a quick recap of where we've been so far in his letter, in this kind of really practical how to do book, this DIY book about being a believer, where we remember quickly in chapter 1, where he kind of just starts off speaking about this confident hope, this confident stand that as believers that we have. James chapter 2, this compassionate service that believers should be involved in. Chapter 3, the beginning of chapter 3, how as believers we should be speaking. And all of that, when we think about it, comes down to what does our character look like? And so when we think about it, just as you can look at a tree and you can see its fruit or its leaves or anything like that, that is the character of that tree. That are the characteristics of that tree. And as a believer, what are our characteristics? And one thing we can clearly see here, that is James is telling us that we need to live out our faith in a real practical way, but that outworking that of our faith needs to be undergirded with wisdom. And so that's been a kind of a challenging thought for me this morning, just to kind of, what do I say about this? Is what does this wisdom actually look like? And when we started seeing that, going a bit further into the verse, we see things such as, it's not about our gain. It's not about it's not about the selfish gain that we want to try to get out of it. So if you're ever doing something and you want to get people to say, look how amazing that person is, or look how amazing you are, you've done it for the wrong reason. And so when we start seeing as well, he even gets as far to saying that it's demonic, it's evil, when we start getting self-centered and self-glorifying. And the true kind of wisdom that comes from God, this outworking, this characteristic, it loves others, it's gentle, it's peaceful. It actually plants seeds so that others can grow. And I loved that thought as well. And it kind of got me onto this thought, thinking something that Sue said the other morning. So we were having a staff Skype session the other morning. And so I know I've been very guilty of this myself, is where we all say that, where I've been saying, sorry, and I'm sure many other people have said this as well, that we're all in the same boat. And so Sue said something that really, really just stood out for me. And Sue, thank you so much for actually saying this. Where Sue just said, we're actually not all in the same boat. Yes, we're all in the same storm, but all of our boats are different. Some of us can weather the storm a little bit easier than others. And that got me really thinking. That is so true. And as we come to this time from the 1st of May, start to gradually easing down the lockdown, we need to realize that things are still going to be different. I remember as a kid, my mom and my dad will often always say to me, back in the good old days. And so one of those things is they always used to walk barefoot in the snow to school all the time. It was amazing how in our country it used to snow all over the place. But when we think about it, back in the good old days, we need to realize that those days are gone. Those days are behind us. That there's this new normal coming forward. And so I know that there's been even thoughts going like, now is the time for us as believers to stand up and to do something, to stand up and be counted, to stand up and make a difference. And yes, while I believe this is a time that we can be doing that, I believe that now is not the time for us to start. Now is the time that we should have always been doing this already. That when we think about it, our character shouldn't only be willing to get involved and do things when time gets tough. We should have been doing this from the beginning. And maybe this is a time where we can just stop and reflect and going, how do I need to readjust my character? How do I need to readjust who I am to kind of see what Scripture has been telling me all along and live that out in a real practical way? A way that is an outpouring of what God is doing in my life, but a way that's also wise, a way that helps others instead of breaking them down, a way that builds people up instead of breaking them down. And so the challenge that I want to leave with us this morning is that when we look at this, genuine wisdom, being wise, calls us to do things, causes us to do things in a God-honoring, loving, gentle, sincere way. What is that going to look like for every single one of us? And so I wanted to challenge us all this morning to do one small act today. What is one small thing that you can do today to make a difference in the life of somebody? And think about it. I'm not going to give you any suggestions because there's so many things that we can do. But what is one small thing that you can do that people can honestly stop and saying, hey, look at that. Look at that person. There's something different about them. And we know as believers what that is. That is God working in and through us. Because when we think about it, the wisdom that we're called to have is a wisdom that causes us to be different than the world. It's a wisdom that is gentle, a wisdom that is God-honoring. And so when we think about this journey as well, that as a church that we've been on to become gospel-centered, Christ-focused, this is exactly what God is calling us to do. It's to make a difference in the world that we find ourselves in. What is that going to look like for every single one of us?